Wisecracker36. I thought I would do a crazy video this morning on our G40 game. This is G40 with the UDH, UHD. This is fun and looking forward to getting into a game where I'm going to show you guys the Carillion knot. I think it might be a breakthrough. I don't know. The big thing is it enables British fighters to get to Karelia to get to Moscow, but it drains quite a few resources from Moscow. But it's what I call either the Karelian knot or the poor Germany strategy, because this strategy can impoverish Germany, keeps this $5 bonus out of their hands, keeps the two for a longer period of time, I should say. Obviously, if you have a determined German effort to kill Novgorod, it's going to happen, and then you would just flee to Karelia, but then these troops are isolated and eventually wiped out by the force in Karelia, and then eventually you grab Norway. So I call this either the Karelian knot or the poor Germany strategy. The problem is it impoverishes the Moscow and may lose you Moscow, but this becomes a theater, whereas in most games this is completely dominated by the Germans. This becomes an active theater, and obviously that pulls at the German resources that could be devoted to here, or to even to, for instance, London, um, since even Russian fighters could make it to the UK. So, but you might lose Moscow. But in many iterations of the game, people lose Moscow. But you might not too, because of how much this does impoverish Germany. Taking away the $5 bonus, taking away this, giving Russia more money, by the way, five here. So, altogether, when they lose, if for instance you have both of these, that'd be $5 plus $3 a piece. That'd be $11, and of course that is a loss of five plus um, five more, 10. So that is in total, um, as far as deficit, as far as the economies go, that is a 5 and 6 is 11, and 5 and 5 is 10. $21 difference. 22 if you count 22, 23 if you count Karelia. And if you somehow manage to keep on Novgorod and he sort of bypasses you for the Moscow push, that's $7 in addition to that. So that's $30 difference, um, which of course is huge. But anyways, let's not look at that right now. I wanted to take a look at inflation. So if we took a look at, there's a book called Superabundance, by the way. And if you think that the world is in peril, this book sort of gives you a really different view of it. Kind of Gail Pooley, I think his name is, and he measures everything by sort of a common denominator of light hours or light minutes, light hours, and says that we live in this just super abundant time, and our wealth is pretty almost unimaginable to a person, for instance, who lived in London in 1750 or something like that. So he found a common denominator. And the common denominator that I'm using today to do my little math experiment is the infantry units. Now, this is a unit that is a little difficult, honestly speaking, because as much as I like it, it does get you into a different calculation down here, and I'll explain that in a minute. Probably I would have done I will do another one on the airplane, which is a little different, and I'll explain why in a minute. Um, Maybe the bomber even actually might be on the other side of it, might be even better. So if we look at an infantry units, we often look at in over here, we look at what's called TUV, total unit value. And when you do a battle, you'll actually, um, let's see if I can get players right here. TUV, total unit value. Go down here, and you're trying to keep this buffer if you're the allies, or you're trying to shrink it if you're the Axis. 2,072 units on the board. That includes factories and air bases, by the way. And the Axis have 1499. And so you're trying to have battles in which you shrink that. You gain a huge TUV. For instance, this initial battle in 110, normally speaking, cost the British a battleship $20 plus the 13, 12, 22. And usually there's only one casualty or two, so maybe a $12 sub. And so 20 plus 24 is 44. And if they only lose the two subs, that's 6 from 44. And you've got a $38 swing of TUV, total unit value. But that is under the assumption that all of our units are the same. And that is only predicated on the notion that all of our incomes are the same. And my suggestion here is that we evaluate TUV not on an assumption that all incomes are the same, because they're not. So, for instance, for the Italians, a loss of a single infantry early game is devastating. This infantry, I would contend, is equivalent to an American tank, maybe even an American destroyer. And for the Chinese, late game, one infantry is the equivalent of about a bomber, I would say. This is just a wag. Um, but let's take a look at it and see what I'm talking about. That's why it's when people talk about TUV swings, I'm like, are you really calculating accurately? So if a German early game loses an infantry, it is worth 1/10 of their national income. If a Japanese lose, and obviously the smaller this bottom number becomes, the worse of an impact. Um, if a Japanese soldier is lost, it is 1/8, 8.6 of its income. And like I said, the Italian, if an Italian loses it, it is 1/3 of its national income per turn. Now, you could actually do some really complicated stuff with this and try to estimate German incomes out to turn 5 or 6, and that would probably be a little more realistic, because that's when the actual battles they're losing troops every turn, and the Allies are losing troops every turn. Um, Here, for the Russians, it is only 1/12 of their income, so they're able to lose them. But of course, they do lose them, obviously eventually, and they can fall back. So some of these values, so at the beginning, this looks really good for the Russians, right? And really good for the purchase of infantry. So then we move on to the Americans. The Americans, it's only 1/17. There's a complicating factor here, a huge complicating factor, I would say, and I'll get into that in a minute. And for the Chinese, of course, devastating. That's why a fallback position is really quite good most of the time, unless you can do that Yunnan stack and actually win. Um, if you can do that, that's a huge difference. But the England is a little different, and I count England and UK. In other words, UK being both combined. Um, England 1/10, and there's a complicating factor there, and then UK 1/15. I will note, yeah, and then Anzac 1/3. Now, what are the complicating factors? What makes this actually a bit of a brain, a bit more difficult than what I'm suggesting? And that's factories and transports. So, and this is where Germany truly shines. And just, you cannot make up this difference. Here is the cost of a infantry purchase put on a transport. Now, if you're using transports to start the game and you never bought another transport, that would be good. If not, you are looking at this. Now, obviously, I am assuming transports are not double used. So, and this is one of the problems with the Americans, right? Is that the transports many times do not get used twice. That's a huge disadvantage, which is why I've always hoped that you could do like in Classic, just a bounce back and forth, 101 to 91, 101 to 91. Um, that would make a huge difference because you can do multi-use transports, and then the cost of the transports goes down. Because remember, transports are not actual units; they're just infrastructure. So the actual cost of an American infantry put on a ship and transported across the ocean, and that transport never gets used again, that infantry actually cost America 6.5, $6.50 IPCs. Now that is going to, um, you know, China has nothing like that to deal with. Germany has nothing like that to deal with. Japan many times gets double usage out of their transports. Many times, especially with good players, obviously. Uh, Russia doesn't have to use transports, not a problem. England does. UK Pacific doesn't. ANZAC does. Each infantry built to get into action has a real cost of $6.50. Now, if single use, I'll write that down. Single use transport. That's why it's so important to try to use double, try to get those back home. And of course, this would, especially be effective. And if you were talking about, for instance, a suicide transport, this is a transport that's single use. You're talking about um, 3 plus 7. Um, oops, sorry. 3 plus 7 um, equals 10. So if you're transporting one infantry, for instance, in this situation, you might go down to Borneo, um, pretty obviously, or Java. Um, Pretty obviously, that is costing you $10. That infantry costs you $10, not the transport. That infantry costs you $10 to get it where it needed to be useful. Okay, so as far as factories, factory initial first turn cost, assuming you fill it up with infantry, 3, 6, 9, and 12 is 21. Divided by 3 means each individual infantry costs you $7. If you double use that, turn 2, each of those infantry, the whole game, has cost you $5. If you use it turn 3, each of those infantry has cost you $4.3. And by turn 4, it's really negligible. You've produced 12 units, and each of those has cost you $4. Turn 5, you're getting into great a great zone. So in other words, fully use your factories. Now, mitigating factors. The British start out with the Calcutta factory, um, and that really militates for using this transport here to grab Sumatra, because that's going to give you a bonus. And that also militates for trying to keep Malaya as much as possible. Now, I know that is very, uh, there is little you can do about it, but you can try to resupply it. But as much as possible, using the Calcutta factory obviously mitigates the cost of units coming into the game. And of course, utilizing the South African factory uh, mitigates um, the cost of units coming into the game. And then it does scream at us to grab a Egypt factory. And of course, it also mitigates grabbing the Egypt factory as soon as possible, barring Sea Lion. The earlier you can buy that factory, the more your cost for that factory goes down. Um, was this? I don't. As far as it, I think this probably that these free factories. I mean, if you were going to do some sort of house rule, um, the being able to destroy um, this factory in Ukraine or this factory in Novgorod or move it, as far as a house rule, huge balancing effect. Huge. These are free factories, which is, of course, historically ridiculous, as well as, um, you should be able to least damage them full capacity. Uh, and games like the Captain's Game do that. This factory should not. These two factories should not. These three factories um, should be able to at least be damaged to full capacity, if not removed. Um, maybe you could remove the Paris one, but because Paris was surrendered to the Germans, but you would think they'd be able to. These factories are a huge gift, is what I'm saying, and a huge disadvantage to the Allies. So really, I believe in maybe in 40, some of these factories might not have been there. As far as obviously, the other thing is protect your transports. Don't lose your transports if at all possible. I mean, start being just extraordinarily careful with your transports. And before you, and the only reason to do a suicide transport is if the net gain, for instance, let's take a look at the um, Java grab. Um, if this can stay in play, it's costing you 10 IPCs um, to grab this. You keep this for 2 turns, you're getting closer. Now, the other factor to consider is, let's say you're grabbing this Java and you're going to make them fight for it. This actually is, um, it's great, obviously, $4. You get it for maybe 2 turns, maybe three. The other factor, three, you're in the green. But the other factor is that you are making him use 2 transports. So remember that he's got to use 2 transports in order to grab Java. And how many times, how does that displace those 2 transports so they can't get multi-use? Because remember, the more he is able to use those transports multiple times for multiple operations, the cost of those transports go down for him. So for you to use him to use 2 transports on Java means those transports are they're limited, their use is being limited, and the cost is obviously staying high. The other thing I would say is that you could, in some respects, even combine the the empire together, and then you would get something like three, and then you would get the $10 on top of the 46, 56, and then you would get an even higher number as you count all of 156, um, 51, 54. Um, well, off of 60 is 12. That's 57. So that'd be 11. 111. No, I'm sorry. 119. Right? 19. So 30 is 10. Yeah, 1 and 19. So that's tremendous numbers right there. A little less than that. So 10 into 30. I mean, 10 times 30 is 30. 10 times 20 is 60. So 119. So that means that the British Empire's infantry, three, four factories, five factories. Make it really, that's a great benefit. All right, that's my thoughts. Okay, okay. So where am I seeing this the most? Let's see. Let's say that you combine all of these Russians and you attack the Japanese. Is that the best example? I suppose the best example might be the destruction of an Italian tank being just about equivalent to the loss of a Russian infantry. All right, so we got 1/12 right here. Might even be worse. I mean, look at this, 1/12 and the Italians at the beginning, 1/3. So we're talking about the cost, four times the cost, 1.3 times 4 is 12. So we're talking about the possibility of one infantry equaling a bomber, an Italian bomber. So, so it's you got to keep those comparisons in mind when you're doing a cost analysis benefit. For instance, a famous one is the Japanese will park a partial fleet in 37, and then I've done this myself, and there'll be a combined fleet here. And the famous instance was I sent the British battleship in and planes from Calcutta after an American wave. And also, Farmer Boy did this against. Farm Boy did this against. Dang, I gotta go. Against Arthur Bomber Harris. Send the American fighters in on an air raid. Send the British ship and then finish them off with Anzac. And the cost looks abnormally high or extremely high, but the actual inflationary cost is greater for the Japanese because of replacement cost. All right, I really do have to run. Okay, this is Crockett 36, stretching it out, doing a video on inflation and comparative. This would be in like an exchange rate, a pound for a dollar for a yen, um, that kind of thing. Okay, Crockett 36 out.